Welcome back since last week
Yeah.
to Cambridge Inside Out. My name is Robert Winters.
And I'm Judy Nathans, wearing a brand new 30th anniversary shirt. Not that I planned to, but I was wearing a very stripy shirt, which, as I should know on video, just bounces all over the place. So
That's a fact.
I'm glad they had a shirt I could wear.
Well
so
done.
There you go.
Anyway, today's May 15th, 2018, and just happens to be my birthday.
That's right. Oh my gosh.
Right.
But I'm not going to sing happy birthday.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of May birthdays. What a nice time.
I actually celebrated my birthday by grading extension school exams frantically.
Oh my goodness.
Because the deadline is tomorrow, and I had like a telephone book. For those of you who remember what telephone books were,
Yes.
this thick of exams to
my
plow
goodness.
through, and I just
That's right. You have a lot of students in those.
Yeah,
They come from all different towns
and
right?
countries.
Countries.
Well, there's also online students, but those ones I have to grade online. So
Right.
that's how I celebrate my birthday. Is I
My goodness.
go to work.
All right.
So anyway,
No birthday cake? Nothing celebrating later?
not yet. We'll see. Who knows? Who knows?
You never know what we're
Anyway,
gonna
but it's been fun. I actually kind of enjoy doing what I like doing as a way of celebrating my birthday, and I actually like teaching my classes.
But not
so.
grading exams.
Not my favorite thing to do. Definitely not my favorite thing to do. So, and I did somehow manage to, in spite of all of these hideous responsibilities, I managed to stop by City Council last night.
Yes, well, you generally do.
I
saw
generally
you
do.
there. Were you wearing a plaid-ish kind of shirt?
Might have been. I don't remember.
I don't remember. But
Yeah.
were you sort of in the corner there?
I was.
Yeah.
I think I was back in the corner there.
There were very few people, so I think I saw you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I stick around at city council meetings, and sometimes
this
it gets a little
ended
boring.
A little after 8.
Yeah, it was a relatively
8:30,
short one. That was pretty helpful, enabled me to go back and finish my job.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. It was like the second week in a row where it seemed like parking.
That took up a big part of the night.
So Vice Mayor Devereaux, I think, correctly characterized it as parking is the third rail of local politics.
That's right.
You know, and it's true.
Yep.
You know, in many respects. I think
Right.
what spurred this was.
Well, it was a charter-righted item from last week. Which was about Inman Square business area.
Yeah, it was like what seemed to be just sort of an interesting idea.
Yeah.
That said, well, why don't we find a way to accommodate people who work in some of the small businesses around Inman Square? But it does
because they're going to be having a lot of construction issues and stuff like that.
Yeah, but even if
and also the transportation isn't as direct there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it'd be one thing you can certainly make the easy case in a place like Central Square. Well, why don't you just take the T?
Right, and there's
which works
buses
for
that
a
go
lot
along
of
Mass
people.
Ave. Right.
Yeah, but as somebody put it, says if you live in Attleboro and you work in a place, it's sort of not so easy.
Your commute would take a couple hours because you have to do a couple.
I mean, if the public transit around here was a little more predictable and schedules were.
And if we had light rail, which we should have had, Caucus said that years ago, it would have been easier to get to the city. But anyway, we don't have any of those things. So
I know. So people say, well, just take public transportation. They're actually asking a lot.
Right.
Because
But the issue, I think, because a lot of teachers came.
Yes.
But they had to be told kind of, well, it really isn't on the agenda because that was not part of that. But they thought it would be amended to include that, and I guess that's where it's been left. Like,
insofar as it's a charter right item, I would argue that it is
right.
on
Well,
the agenda.
McGovern did let. I mean, there weren't that many people that spoke, but.
So what became the controversy, and I guess this is completely understandable, is that so there was a move to accommodate, sort of do right by small businesses, principally in and around Inman Square.
Right.
Though Craig Kelly and others said, well, we should really have a much broader conversation about citywide. How do we?
Well, city employees. I mean,
and
broader,
then
teachers.
Teachers actually have been griping for a long time. I have seen many a city council order saying, could you do something about the teachers and parking at the Fletcher Matern Academy or here, there, wherever, right? And it's. So if you get an order, which seems like it's all done for all the best intentions, it says, please, Mr. City Manager, could you look into accommodating some of the small businesses? Then the teachers say, well, listen, we've been asking for the same thing for ages.
Yeah, I mean, it's all understandable, but basically Louis Di Pasquale, the city manager, did kind of close it down and say, especially around the businesses, because he was concerned that he's put all these rules in place for these larger businesses about vehicle reduction, but which I think is different than a small business, but
I think there was at least a little acknowledgement that might be the case.
Yeah, but he did not want it to go. He wanted to be smaller scoped. Like, let's look at this one issue first.
Yeah.
Craig Kelly said no, it should. He wanted to be it.
Now, I have to say,
how did it end up?
Well, when he first floated that notion about, well, we got to be a little careful about this, even last week, and then again last night.
Yeah, more so last night.
I was reading into that, and I'm still not 100% sure I got this right.
Yeah.
But I know a little bit of the history about the
your
parking
whole thing
restrictions.
Why don't you comment on that?
All right. So. And it was interesting that the manager said, well, the city solicitor has some great concerns about the legality. And I thought, okay, now I'm.
Well, that was about using the residential permit for other uses.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So all right. So not all cities and towns. You say, well, here are places where you can park, and here's places you can't park.
Right.
And I think that's something that any city or town can just do.
Right. Brookline does it.
But if you say, but only some people can park. Right, like residents only. That's not something that any city or town can just do because they feel like it.
What, they have to get a state?
You get some special act that says.
Oh, you do?
And I didn't actually know this until they were talking about it last night.
I didn't know either.
That they said, okay, we're going to go to the legislature and ask for some authority to regulate things in a way that basically.
Interesting. Even though those are city streets.
Exactly. Right, but they're public ways.
Well, that makes sense because the speed limits also have to go through the state.
The thing is that you might say, well, we don't like having large 18-wheeler trucks in the city.
Right.
And they say, well, sorry, you can't as a town just say no. You can't throw up the gates at the town boundary and say you'll go away. There are ways to make it happen, but they think the way the law is written is you have to do sort of a major traffic study of inroads and outroads and make sure that commerce cannot be blocked. You can't interfere with interstate commerce. So cities can't just do whatever the hell they please, right? But I didn't actually know that the resident parking permit was something that they had to. I never thought about it, honestly.
Who did? I mean, who does? You get one.
So I said, well, that's interesting. I'd like to. And actually, several of the council says, well, we'd like to hear the story. We'd like to hear some of that background about why there may be some legal impediments to.
So that's for another time, though. They didn't do that last night, did they?
Well, they did send the word to the city solicitor that they would like information back.
Right, eventually. Right. I just wanted to know if I missed something like that.
Yeah, but the thing is that the more kind of exciting legal quagmire potentially was that the city was embroiled in litigation. Probably about now 25 years ago. It was, I think, if my memory.
Early 90s?
Yeah. Now, if you go way back into like 1970s, the city voluntarily signed on to an agreement to restrict commercial parking.
Really? In the 70s?
Well, now you got to understand, this is sort of one of those things where the effect today may have in no relationship to the reasons that got us here. Okay, so back then, there was concern that, and I hope I get this right. Yeah. Dan Geer, help me out if Dan Geer? He was one of the principals with the Cambridge Citizens for Livable Neighborhoods. Okay. So what happened was that there was some concern that there was big development happening in Boston, and Kendall Square, which is just a little jump over the bridge, was pretty undeveloped. It was kind of empty.
I remember as Leechmere was there.
Yeah, and there was a concern, and I think it was probably realistic, that in fact some entrepreneurs might decide to build parking garages in Kendall Square.
To accommodate people going to Boston.
Right, so if you would work in Boston, you would just park in Kendall Square and then either maybe take the train or something right over into work in downtown, and then Cambridge would become this sort of parking district.
Satellite parking.
So I think now, and again, I'm getting this sort of secondhand. I wasn't there back in the early 70s when this. It was sort of pursuant to the Clean Air Act that basically was used to do this voluntary sign-up. Now, parts in Boston also signed on to this, but there was a distinction between restricting commercial parking for a fee.
I see.
Versus just versus parking for employees without a fee, right?
Okay.
Whether they say whether you had to go through the ticket spitter or not, right? I don't know if they still use those things. But anyway, Cambridge voluntarily signed on to this, and most people had sort of forgotten about that until they were doing development around 1 Kendall Square, basically where the cinema went in.
Yeah.
And they built a big
Binney
parking
Street.
garage, a Binney Street garage.
Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now that happened, was it Deborah McManus, I think was the woman's name? It was right in her backyard, it popped up. So, she just lost it over that, and it turned into a big hullabaloo.
Wow.
Lawsuits were filed. The Cambridge Citizens for Livable Neighborhood, I think, may have come in. I may have this a little wrong, but I think they came into existence maybe as part of that, maybe not, I'm not sure.
So this was when? When was this?
This would have been...
Is this the 25 years ago that you're talking about?
Earlier, actually. Probably about...
In the 80s?
1990-ish, I'm
Well,
thinking.
that's about... Okay, yeah, so about 20...
So there was a lawsuit, and it led to...
Suing who?
The CCLN, I think they may have been joined with the Conservation Law Foundation.
So they sued the city or sued the developer?
I think they sued the city.
Huh.
And... because the city permitted it.
So it was their zoning that permitted it. Okay.
So it was never adjudicated in court. There was a settlement. And the settlement basically the city made with CCLN said, we're going to establish, and I hope I have the chronology right here.
Someone will correct.
It's been a quarter of a century, you'll have to forgive me. But there was that they would establish what they called an interim parking freeze.
Okay, that's when it came about.
It was never meant to be permanent, but it was in the meantime. And with it, they established a parking bank and a procedure that said that if you want to build new commercial development, honestly, the CCLN people were very gung-ho opposed to commercial development, especially in Kendall Square. That was kind of the mindset at the time, and it actually led to a lot of the downzoning petitions that were proliferating in the
what did they want there?
late
Just
90s.
Housing, or
Nobody even talked about housing then. Rent control was still around.
So just open space, nothing? Or I mean, you either have commercial or you have housing.
There are those who just oppose stuff, not necessarily construct
stuff.
So
they didn't. They saw the future and they didn't like it.
They didn't like it. So anyway,
this
right or wrong.
So a bank. What was that?
So what happened was that the city could not permit new commercial development, and honestly, they needed Kendall Square to have a lot more development. That was sort of part of the plan.
It's a tax base. That's why we have good services.
And they said, well, you can't build these things here unless you have sufficient parking space. And the parking freeze put a cap on parking spaces. So what they did, this gets us a little bit forward into the future. There was part of the agreement, I think it was explicitly in the settlement, that said you could permit new commercial construction, but if it needed commercial parking, you had to get spaces from the parking bank, and there was, I think, a 3-person committee that had to decide whether you would get the spaces from the bank.
Well, how many spaces did the bank have?
It varied. Okay, so now the thing is, there weren't very many.
Did they start off with a deposit?
I'm not sure. I don't remember.
All right.
But I do remember that there weren't that many, and they needed to get some spaces in the bank. Okay.
And
otherwise, commercial development stops.
So how do you get spaces in the bank?
So how do you get spaces in the bank? Well, one way, there may have been other ways, but one way was there used to be a lot of unregulated spaces around the city. Spaces that you could just pull up, sometimes in commercial zones, no parking meters, and not necessarily resident only either. So
there was no signage, so anybody could park there.
There are still some. I ain't telling you where.
But I mean, there's nothing, like, we don't have a thing you can't park overnight like they do in Brookline.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Right. So that was the deal, and the deal was you can add spaces to the bank, but to get one in the bank, you had to regulate 2 unregulated ones on the street.
You had to regulate 2 unregulated.
Right.
Who had to? The city had to.
That's the only party that can.
So is that where the residential permit thing came from?
No.
That's been around.
Residential permit parking had been around, but they used to be in addition to the resident-only spaces. There were a lot of unregulated spaces.
I see what you're saying.
All of the parking on my street, for example, was open.
So what they did is basically increase more residential permit spaces.
Well, I remember this process. This was probably about
mid-90s?
Early 90s, early to mid-90s.
Okay.
Lauren Preston was in the traffic department. I can't remember if George Chiso was still the boss or whether Lauren Preston was the boss. But what they did is they went around the city, like a little dog and pony show, to all these little neighborhood groups, and they said, well, we want to regulate these things here. Now, they weren't telling you why.
Okay.
All right, that they just needed to do it because they wanted commercial development. Because I think maybe people wouldn't have been so thrilled to hear that. But
yeah, but they were getting more spaces.
Well,
just for them.
But the thing is, unregulated spaces were, I used to park in unregulated spaces as well.
All right, okay.
But the thing is once upon a time, because I lived directly across the street from the Longfellow Elementary School,
which was an active school.
In the daytime, Longfellow teachers, as well as quite a few city workers who worked at the City Hall
because you live next door is the annex, so you had lots of people.
Those who didn't live in Cambridge, they didn't have resident stickers, they would park in a lot of these unregulated spaces.
Which there were no meters then, is that?
And there were no meters.
Because now
and
there
it was
are.
fine, and I have to say, and everybody was happy. Because, those of us who lived there, if I was working at Wellesley College in those days, so if I drove out to work, I leave in the daytime. School teachers from Longfellow would park on Lee Street.
So you're saying there weren't that many problems with teachers then because they could get spaces? How many were there?
I don't know, but the thing is that there
just didn't seem to be a problem.
It didn't seem to be that great a problem because there was enough unregulated spaces around.
Okay.
It seemed to work.
So this is why we have less unregulated because they. This is your theory, or is that true?
No. This is a fact.
All right.
So the thing is that for every two you regulate, you put one in the bank. So they were really gung-ho to get space in the bank. So in this period of a year or so, every parking space, there used to be on Mass Ave, there would be some places without parking meters, then parking meters showed up. And they even put some up on the corners.
I know they did, right around in between Central and...
So those all appeared right in that very short window of time.
Interesting. Yeah.
And then any other spaces further up, they just made them resident only. Right. And so the unregulated spaces just sort of dried up.
Wow.
And that's, I think, part of why we have a little bit of a problem today.
Yeah, when people coming in from outside the city.
But the thing is that the city didn't want to stick with the interim parking freeze as a permanent solution. It was only meant as an interim solution. So they started working in the early 90s through the mid 90s to establish an alternative to the parking freeze. There were some famous cases of the parking freeze where Genzyme opened up some headquarters across the river.
Well, they went across the river because they couldn't do things
they couldn't do it, right? And the city, well, this isn't right. So the city was pretty desperate to want to change that. So they passed what they called the Vehicle Trip Reduction Ordinance.
Okay. And when about? Do you know who?
And the Vehicle Trip Reduction Ordinance essentially is a component that gets filed with the state implementation plan, known as the SIP agreement, with the DEP, which goes in as part of the Clean Air Act to the EPA at the federal government, right? Wow. So our filing, had to get approved at the state level, whatever. I remember when this happened because I went to the McCormick building and I spoke in favor of the city's efforts.
So they had public comment even at that level.
Yes, okay. And there were people from, I think CCLN, but certainly from what was it? I forget the other advocacy group, who were opposed to the city doing it because they wanted to keep the parking freeze in place.
But I imagine there are a lot of business associations that were for it, no?
I think this. Yeah. Oh yeah. So anyway, so they successfully changed the plan, and then that committed the city to doing certain things. Okay. I will say, not trying to be controversial here, but the beginning of bike lanes in Cambridge began as part of that because the city had to demonstrate its commitment to its new plan and alternate modes of transportation. I mean, I don't want to be.
When did the Easy Shuttle start? Was that part of that?
I don't know. So
that's been around
Jim
for years.
Gascoigne's thing, the Charles River Transportation, they have these traffic, what do you call it, traffic and parking demand management organizations.
Yeah, I'm just
so they were creating shuttles, and if you wanted
still around.
So if you wanted to open up a business, you needed parking. You had to do things like T-passes for your employees. The city had to do it for its own employees too. They had to commit to this.
Well, that's a good thing.
I'm not saying
MIT just last year gave you a lifetime thing,
absolutely
didn't it?
true. I'm not saying these are bad things. In fact, these are things where I would hope we would have been encouraging anyway.
Right.
But let's be clear. That's half of the bike lanes that appeared around that time were done because for every mile of bike lane you could put in there,
you could get more in the bank?
No, that wasn't for the bank, but it showed proving that Cambridge's commitment to its, in fact, when bike lanes were first proposed in Central Square, and there was a competition. People said, no, we want a median versus bike lanes.
Median.
And the deputy city manager at the time says, you're getting the bike lanes because if you don't, we'll get sued.
Wow.
That was the environment at the time.
When was this? Was this the mid-90s
now? That was
or
mid to late 90s, right?
Okay.
So the thing is, Cambridge was obligated to do certain things, right?
Yeah.
So nowadays, roll the clock forward 20 years, now people are saying, well, first off, Ubers and Lyfts are clogging the streets and, so the vehicle trip reduction business is kind of questionable anyway.
Right. There's still vehicles, but they
Right.
may be carrying more people though.
They
so,
may be,
yeah.
and maybe a few more people are not
And
choosing
they
not
don't
to
end
own
up here at night
vehicles.
either. They go back
Right.
home to where.
I know, but a lot of people, those Uber and Lyft drivers are coming from out of town to
Right,
basically
but they
work
go
the
back
streets
home
here.
then. They don't.
Right.
They don't have to park in the
So in
city.
that sense, they're no
Yeah.
different than a commuter, and we were
True.
trying to block the commuter. So,
Right.
say, no, you're supposed to use public transportation,
Yeah.
right? So,
But they are their own business.
they're running a business.
Their
and,
car is their business.
and you can't
yeah.
block the commerce. There's no
True.
legal way to say you can't do it, right? So
Well,
many of the,
yet. I mean, who knows?
right,
Yeah.
but a lot of the city's initiatives basically are being defeated by
Yeah.
just reality.
Right.
So now you roll the clock to today, and you got small businesses saying, well, we could use a little relief here.
Right.
And then the word back from the manager's office is, well, there may be some legal quagmires, and I'm thinking, in other words, you can't
Just change
modify
that.
this commitment you signed on to for vehicle trip reduction, even if in fact the world is changing it for you.
So you think that's what it is, not so much that they have to get new legislation about the use of the residential permit areas? I think it's both.
I don't want
right?
to predetermine what Nancy Glover, the city solicitor, is
But you
going to
just
come
said
back
that
with.
the residential permit thing is involved
That's
with the state.
That's clearly a piece of it. And,
okay, so that's a piece of it.
But the thing is that I think Louis DePasquale pointed out. He said there were a lot of people in the community development department, and specifically, I know he was referring to the people in the traffic and environmental planning division of CDD, because they live and breathe to regulate parking and transportation. And for them to roll over and say, well, I think it's okay if a few more people park, that's just sort of not in keeping with their mindset.
Well, it's just making parking easier. It's not the few more people. It would be just maybe sharing a space versus having it empty.
Well,
I guess I see it that way.
I think Louis was saying,
the
let's
teachers
pick
are
a
coming
study.
here. They're just getting up earlier and getting more tired. They still have to get here.
Or they're parking at a parking meter and then coming out and feeding the meter.
Right, so that's crazy. I mean, there's got to be a
supposed to
solution. To me, the teachers are more, personally.
Listen,
the teachers are teaching the children, and they have to be there
I
for them.
gotta say, speaking as a person who lives directly across the street
Right.
from the school building,
Right.
I'm kind of with the teachers. I think they should get some accommodation.
I do.
So
I feel like that is crucial.
If people get up in the morning and they hop in a car and they go to work someplace else, which loosens up a little bit of the parking, and there's a school nearby,
Exactly,
and then some teachers want to come and use them in the daytime, I call that sharing.
Yeah.
I think sharing is a pretty good idea.
Didn't someone mention, or maybe it was a bar, somebody mentioned that they're actually they're going to look at neighborhoods to see what space, or someone should look and see where the spaces
they'll
are?
quantify where the demand is, because there are going to be some places where the demand is just intense regardless.
Exactly, but around certain schools, around certain areas, you can always get a space, and maybe that's
may be some ways to do
shared
it.
spaces.
Yeah, I think
We've
so.
shared everything else. We share our homes with,
I know,
so.
but we may be violating the Vehicle Trip Reduction Ordinance.
Well, they need to just look at all that, because it's important. What is this thing about the Cherry Street parking area? Do you know anything about? They mentioned that, and at first the city said they could use it, and now they can't use it. Do you know anything about that?
That was a lot that I think it's a little up in the air, because the
big
Public Works
construction,
Department may need it as a substitute while they're doing some of these stormwater
Oh,
projects.
right. So maybe that's why
Ultimately,
they
I think,
okay.
and then some people say we should put housing on it, and some people say no, we should use it for parking for teachers or whatever.
No, if it's near schools, I think,
Yeah, but it's sometimes this, the city basically, because of popular demand or legal action, took certain actions at sometimes in the past, and then when you roll the clock forward 20 years, there's this sense we're supposed to commit to it just because that's the way it was.
Right.
I would argue that half of, or most of the upzoning petitions that we've seen for Novartis, Mass and Maine, basically are restoring heights and density allowances that used to exist before they were downzoned.
because of tax stuff?
Because there was a popular mindset
right.
that was very big from like mid 90s, maybe even early 90s till 2000
I'm thinking
or so.
back, you said when there's only one story.
It kind of changed with the end of rent control because then the city started saying, no, we have to allow more housing in all districts.
Yeah.
So there was at least a little bit of movement toward allowing a little more density. And in very recent years, so there's been sort of like the ABC kind of people who sort of say, transit-oriented development, we want to encourage more density. And so some property owners are coming back saying, we want that height back. We want some of the density back.
But there was, I don't want to bring up
the zoning ordinance should kind of roll a little bit with the times.
But there's something in the Sunday Globe about particulates in areas of urban density and how there's great, like the smallest particulate of anything is greater the more dense you get as an urban community, so we're breathing in.
I would agree with you, and people in Somerville know this as well as anyone.
Yeah,
but I also say that motor vehicles, on average, are extraordinarily cleaner.
Right, but I don't think the particulates are just, it could be from just dust on the street. That isn't all from vehicles. There's movement, there's activity, there's whatever. I didn't read the whole article, so I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just saying,
Right.
Progress, you gotta have to balance it out. It's hard.
I agree.
We live in a popular area and it's dense and it's going to get more dense. I see,
it's funny. I find my own point of view on this sort of changing with every day, because there are some people who are just like stop all growth. Other people like build higher, deeper, thicker, whatever.
I'm in the middle.
Really, the more I hear from the ABC or the Residents Alliance type of mindsets about this, the more I say, you're all just wrong. Honestly, you just should make good cities, and sometimes that might mean density, and sometimes it might not.
Are they wrong, or are they just advocating for certain positions? You always need people on either ends, and then maybe you but then you become you establish a middle.
You become a parody in a way. No. Anyway, we're going to take a break, but we'll be back.
Yep.